from Abuja.
It's all about the human struggle to raise the level of living. That's what it's all about. I'm glad you're a part of this one. I'm Magnus Packle, and this is Magnus Packle GVA. I've always had a passion for the economic development of our society and a desire to have a platform to express and share this passion. My belief is that we can free all of our people from the bondage of poverty and deprivation, that we can create well-paying jobs for our young people and be able to take care of our older people, that we can build a society of rising productivity, output, and income, and be competitive in the global marketplace. I have carried this passion through the years as I worked as an economist in one of the biggest private sector companies in the world, taught economics as a professor, and served in government as an advisor on economic policy and related issues. I thank God Almighty that He has allowed me to be able to do this. Now the time has come. In Magnus Packle GVA, our mission is to explore global views and ideas on how we can all contribute to a faster pace of high-quality economic growth and development in Africa. Our show will appeal to people in all walks of life, as it is not only analytical, but also motivating. Now, let's get started. There is no doubt about the very rapid economic ascendancy of China. My calculations show that the Chinese economy will surpass the US in size by 2020. This is extraordinary, considering that just 10 years ago, the size of the Chinese economy was less than 15% of that of the United States. With this growing stature, China's influence is rising around the world, and particularly in Africa. At its recent meeting in Addis Ababa, the African Union unveiled its latest gift from China, the AU Conference Center and Office Towers, worth about $200 million. I applaud China for this, but does this mean that Africa should begin to look east and turn its back on the West? I don't think so. The West, and particularly the United States, have a lot to offer Africa in history, culture, and trade. Africa can more competitively export low-skilled goods to the United States than to China. Bottom line, both China and the West are important to Africa, and Africa must leverage the opportunities of the moment. This subject is deep, and the consequences for Africa are profound. Be sure to be with us soon when we discuss China and Africa in detail. In view today, the unrighteous economy. Connected to this, I had a discussion with Professor Dumas of the University of Texas at Dallas. But before that, our hidden economics for you. I think that just about everything that people do is driven by some economic rationale. Why do certain things happen to certain people? Every week we will try to explain the rationale behind some of these things in our segment called Hidden Economics for You. So this week, no matter who you are, if you get into poverty and stay in it for 3 years, you may never get out of it again. Wow. If you have just fallen into poverty, you better start looking for how to get yourself out quickly. Otherwise, as time goes by, the cost keeps on rising until it becomes impossible for you. In the first year, the cost of search for a job and getting out of poverty, both psychic and substantive, may not be quite that high, as you may be fairly confident that there are opportunities that are close by. In addition, you may have some savings to leverage. People may also be there to encourage you and associate with you. By the second year, your costs rise as you would have already tried what people sometimes call the low-hanging fruits. You must now look further, making things more expensive for you. Your psychic and substantive costs rise. Your confidence starts to wane. Your attitude may even change so much it repels potential helpers as you get desperate and suspicious, and even angry with the world. At this point, you start to lose your friends and sources of strength and support. By the third year, you would have completely lost all your sources of encouragement and support. The cost of search for jobs and other opportunity is now prohibitive and impossible. Everybody you knew would have been pressed. Some friends now actually avoid you. No one has hope in you any longer. What's worse, it all becomes too much for even you. You lose hope yourself, and you have no money. Poverty is now your way of life. There is no way out. Folks, you fall into poverty, don't let the third year catch you there. I make the point that an unrighteous economy exists, always and everywhere, when by whatever reason there is a significant and persistent repression of the economic participation of the people, leading to loss of hope and opportunity. The word itself, unrighteous, suggests that which is unjust, wicked, unfair, and unmerited. An unrighteous economy, therefore, implies that injustice, wickedness, unfairness, and lack of merit is used in the system to allocate scarce resources for the production of goods and services. Basically, this means that whenever this is happening, competent people are likely being excluded in the production of goods and services. And also, resources are poorly allocated. The outcome? Low productivity, low output, and a stagnant or declining level of living, leading to hopelessness and unhealthy rivalry. The primary manifestations of an unrighteous economy include excessive corruption, cronyism, rising unemployment and poverty, and a decline in labor force participation. People not in the labor force, where they are either employed or looking for work, can indeed become free radicals, looking for something important to destroy. As I often put it, if a person is properly employed, the lunch hour would not be long enough to go out to bomb one or two buildings or kidnap anyone. Other manifestations of an unrighteous economy are seen all across Africa. Poor electoral processes, continued incompetent delivery of public goods and services, and increasing breakdown in law and order. When people feel excluded, they panic, become impatient, and look to beat the system. Key point: an unrighteous economy makes outcomes unpredictable and insecurity very possible. How indeed is participation repressed? Broadly speaking, economic participation can be repressed because people don't have tools to work with, or because the political and economic environment is unjust, harsh, or biased. People who lack a good education or appropriate human capital development will not be able to participate optimally in the economy. Similarly, when the political economy has failed in the way it defines property rights or in providing basic infrastructure, the rule of law, and a supportive environment, the people's economic freedom will be undermined, and they will be demoralized and probably engage in perverse compensating behavior. In Africa, many resource-rich countries wind up with high rates of unemployment because the people are not directly engaged in the process of using their resources in the economic development process. Indeed, this is the number one reason why resource-rich countries in Africa have experienced some of the conditions of jobless growth that we continue to see. Eventually, some of these countries will have to find a way to ensure the people have individual rights over their own resources and assets. If a household that finds crude oil or bauxite under their piece of land is permitted to mine it, they will not only pay taxes on it, but will actually also hire people in the community to work for them. Many individuals will find themselves and their communities greatly wealthy from this arrangement. This would be a good thing. Indeed, others who don't have such mineral resources under their land would be caused to engage in other productive activities like farming, fishing, and agro-allied processing. The result of all of this is the building of a more robust and participative private sector. The resource curse often occurs because the people are not adequately involved or connected with the exploitation of their resources. If somehow the government can mine the resources and then use the money to provide infrastructure and basic amenities and maintain law and order for the people, perhaps an unrighteous economy resulting from repressed economic participation may be minimized or even avoided. The crowding out of the private sector in Africa stands as a primary cause of the existence of an unrighteous economy. Many African governments have gotten very large relative to GDP because of a bloated and inefficient bureaucracy. Let's note this. African people cannot compete with the government. If the government is borrowing and spending excessively, and especially when the spending is mostly on non-contributive activities, such as a bloated bureaucracy, the living condition of the people will suffer, along with their ability to be globally competitive. We will see how this is developed in my discussion with Professor Jeff Dumas. I was recently in the United States and had an interview with the world-renowned Professor Lloyd Jeff Dumas, Professor of Political Economy, Economics, and Public Policy at the University of Texas at Dallas, where I did graduate school and completed my PhD in Political Economy. Professor Jeff Dumas was by far my favorite professor. I was privileged to be his teaching assistant. Incidentally, he was the chairman of my dissertation committee. Professor Dumas has published many books and numerous articles in 11 languages. He has discussed his work on TV and radio programs all over the world. He's an authority in economic development, and it was a great opportunity having a discussion with him at his home and on the campus of the very prestigious and beautiful University of Texas at Dallas. Here is a portion of our extensive discussion. Professor Dumas, it's a great pleasure to have you on Magnus Pacul GVA.
It's great to be with you, Magnus.
Thank you very much. It seems like it wasn't too long ago, or maybe it was too long ago, because it was back in the 80s when I was a student in your classes. And you were my professor, and you were just wonderful. And I must say that much of the foundation to what I do today in fighting poverty and underdevelopment really should be credited to you.
Well, I'm very proud of what you've done with what you've learned.
We will try as much as possible to try to relate some of the great concepts that I learned over the years from you and that you continue to churn out. We'll try to connect them to what's happening in Africa and how Africans, can use some of the things that we talk about today to dig themselves out of poverty and deprivation and underdevelopment. So, and one of the things I want to mention also is that there is this new concept that I have been looking at lately that I call the unrighteous economy. And basically what I mean by that is that there is this unrighteous economy that can evolve when there's repression of economic participation. I think that when you have structural setups and institutions that work to repress people in terms of their participation, that you have an outcome that is essentially unjust and unfair, which can lead to low productivity, low output, and then indeed set off a perverse and very vicious circle, that also has many bad things that can come out.
Many people talk about Africa as a resource-rich continent, but it seems to me that the greatest resource Africa has is its people. And people can't do what they're capable of doing unless they're in the right situation, unless there's an economy that gives them the opportunity they need, a political system that allows them the freedom to operate so they can take advantage of their full potential. They can learn what they need to learn and do what they need to do. And I think that's where Africa's future lies, with its people.
Professor Doma, in Africa, poverty still remains a serious issue. What do you see as being the the main reason why Africa still lags the rest of the world, it appears, especially sub-Saharan Africa in the area of poverty reduction?
It's a very complicated question, or at least it's a complicated answer. It's an easy question to ask. But I would say that one of the most important things is there's much too much violence in Africa. There's much too much conflict. There's much too much diversion of resources to economically unproductive activities, particularly in the form of military spending, which is essentially a form of spending that doesn't produce economic well-being, although it may be useful for other reasons, and corruption. I think there is still a mindset in Africa among too many people that to get what you want, what you need, you have to be able to take it from someone else. That's not how economics works. When economics works right, it creates mutual gains. It creates situations where everyone can win. And by your becoming richer, I can become richer as well. So we have to change that mentality as well as to redirect the resources in Africa to more economically productive uses. When you simply increase education without increasing the opportunity to get jobs, to start businesses and so on, you create frustration. A lot of what happened in the Arab Spring in Northern Africa is an example of this, because
Absolutely.
a lot of people were educated,
Yeah.
a lot of young people were educated, they learned to look for a better future, but they had no opportunity. They couldn't find a better future. That's very frustrating. And you don't want to do that. You have to coordinate economic opportunities with education.
Is it possible that one reason why we see the slower pace of development, now there is a fast and brisk pace of economic growth that we're beginning to see in many African countries today across the board. Matter of fact, the average growth rate now is well above 5%, with some very good examples in Ghana, Nigeria, and other places. But it is not translating into the creation of jobs and into vast improvements in the living conditions of the people. So I started to wonder whether there is a preponderance of, or there's a growing amount of this so-called non-contributive activities, relative to what you see in advanced economies. And perhaps is that helping to be a drag on economic growth and development?
I don't think that's just a feature of democracies. I think that bureaucracy and the overgrowth of bureaucracy has been a problem in Africa and in many other parts of the world for a very long time. But I think you can see the interaction between democracy and development with an interesting historical example. Think about South Korea. South Korea was one of the poorest countries on earth in the 1950s. It just emerged from a terrible war in which perhaps 9 million people died on the Korean Peninsula. It was a very poor country. It was a dictatorship for a while. It was a Western-oriented dictatorship, but a dictatorship nevertheless. That helped things get started in a way. Some good decisions were made, some good economic decisions. But it really took off when it became more democratic. When the country became more democratic, more people could participate in the economy, more people could participate in the political process, then South Korea really bloomed. And now it's a country that sells lots of manufactured products all over the world. First-rate, top-quality stuff, not just cheap, at good prices, but very high quality. And that's an interesting historical example. You need to have democracy to allow the economy to flourish, because it allows ordinary people who don't have political standing, who don't belong to the, quotes, right political party, to still engage in business and economic activity and have a chance of succeeding. One of the things that may help with this problem of people becoming impatient is for building a civil society, organizations that ordinary people can join and support, that look out for particular issues, human rights issues, issues of environment, for instance, because that way they're participating in between elections. Elections are not the beginning and end of democracy. In between elections, there have to be ways for people to express their opinions, to apply pressure, to change policies, to encourage certain types of activities on the part of the private sector. And that can be done by participation in civil society. One of the best cures for feeling that you're powerless is to do something. And you can do something if there are organizations of other like-minded people around trying to move in a direction you think works, to support that organization, to be part of what they're doing. Maybe that will help people feel more engaged and be less impatient.
Yeah. So I always try to say that there are two kinds of serious poverty issues. One is the real state of poverty, where somebody's income, let's use income poverty, somebody's income is below some threshold. Then there is this stress, where some people, in my view, have actually died from, because of the weight of wondering, how can I take care of this whole group of people, whether they be family or people from my village, that appear to not be assigned to me. So that represses their ability to move forward. Is there an arrangement? Is there anything that can be done, to cause people to be less dependent? Is there a way of reducing the dependency burden? Because I think that it impacts in a negative way on the working class. Is there anything that we need to look at here to see how we can reduce that dependency burden and that so-called poverty stress?
I think the key word that you used is investment. You have to generate more economic opportunity and more knowledge of economic opportunity through education, investment in human beings, and through investment in infrastructure and the like. Because without generating more capabilities and more opportunities, you're in a situation where if one person starts to succeed, everybody thinks, well, that's the guy who won the lottery, in effect, so we got to latch on to them. If there were more economic opportunity, broader economic opportunities, they would think perhaps instead, well, he did it, why can't I do it as well? And try to do it on their own. That's a very big difference. So this kind of stress that you're talking about could be reduced. And I also would draw a parallel to this and the so-called resource curse that many nations have. Sure. Nigeria, of course, is very dependent on oil revenues. To use the oil revenues to fund consumption, to keep people paid off, in effect, by funding consumption, is one thing. That leads to no development. That doesn't encourage development. To use it as a source of capital for investment, just as the individual in the village who gets a job, if he can use his capital not only for investment in himself, but possibly for investment in some of the other people, rather than just buying them food or providing them some kind of shelter, giving them the means to do it for themselves. It can be a sort of a smaller scale version of the same thing. You use that source of revenue as a fountain of investment opportunity. Then you have a very different economic picture.
Many African countries are past the tipping point and are experiencing an unrighteous economy already. Do these countries represent examples of failed states? Indeed, many people, especially when politically driven, will conclude, and sometimes authoritatively, that an economy has failed. This happens especially when a rival party is in power. What is failure when it comes to a country or a government? In school, typically when you score below 50%, you have failed. So in government, when it scores below 50% in the provision of basic amenities and infrastructure, has it also failed? Many may think so. If this were to be the case, many major African countries would be said to have failed already. The significant volatility, uncertainty, unpredictability, and even hardship that is experienced in some African countries is the result of having entered into an unrighteous economy, where by whatever method there is significant and sustained repression of economic participation. Certainly, for any country, if this repression of economic activity is not halted or reversed, the country will eventually tip and become a failed state. Many governments believe not incorrectly that the real problem they have to overcome to speed economic growth and development is corruption. They then appear busy trying to end it. Quite often, they don't use strategies that are comprehensive enough to lead to success. You allow practices that permit corruption, then you create an agency and sometimes have their staff wear vests and chase people looking under beds and behind curtains. In this process, innocent people often get humiliated, as they must prove their innocence in a setup that makes them look guilty already. While it is good to fight corruption on all fronts, the largest amount of attention and resources should be devoted to preventing corruption. After all, corruption is always and everywhere related to the expected frequency of opportunity. If people feel that opportunities for participation are uncertain and unmerited, then they will be motivated to take a perverse advantage of whatever comes their way, because they believe it may never come again. In Africa, we must have policies and programs that strengthen competitive economic participation. These include commitments to education, public health services, skills development, community development, efficient resource management, and infrastructure development. People must know from early childhood that you may not be successful if you are not competitive enough. And for sure, you cannot be given a position of public trust if you are not promising and considered among the best to have such a position. Increasing economic participation is about enabling people to achieve their potential in the workplace and to ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate fully in the economy. When economic participation is rising, everyone benefits through stronger economic growth in our communities and our countries. In the end, it is left to us. Africa must get everyone involved. If we don't, if only a few are participating, those that are left out will still be free radicals, ready to destroy the little we might have built. It is imperative to do better. Africa must do better. Every country. Otherwise, we all get caught in the vicious web of an unrighteous economy. I'm Magnus Packel, and that's my view.